Hi everyone, I'm Bob Paulinski, Master of Wine. Today's video is about debunking some of the biggest myths about wine. It's a long list. It can reach from me to you and probably back to me again, but with a little bit of luck, we can shut the door on a couple of the really big myths. So let's get right to it. Let's start out with what may be the number one big wine myth of all, and that is wine improves with age. Well, I'm going to make the claim that 99% of the wine produced in today's wine world does not age well. Most of these wines should be consumed within 3 to 4 years of the vintage date, in some cases even less than that. These are wines that are built on primary fruit. They're fresh, they're bright, clean, they're really lively. All of that fades with time in the bottle. Now, every wine has a life cycle, and that life cycle is generally 3 to 4 years out. You go beyond that, and all sorts of tertiary characteristics start to develop in the wine. When those characteristics come, the primary fruit character is lost, the vibrancy of the wine is lost, and really the appeal and backbone of that wine is gone as well. I recall reading a research paper some years ago that made the claim that more than 90% of the wine purchased within a retail store is consumed within 48 hours of that purchase. These are not generally aged wines. These are typically wines that are 2, 3, maybe 4 years out from the vintage date. The wineries are aware of this, the marketing people are, and the accountants absolutely are. What it's saying is people are generally not looking to age wines. Now, if you are looking to age some wines and you're looking to select wines that fall into that 1%, make sure you do your due diligence in terms of what you're selecting. And on top of that, the storage conditions are absolutely critical. Those two things in unison are going to put you in the best spot for a good end result. I recall a story from many years back, probably around the year 2000. This is when I still had my wine shop. And I recall a person coming in who was telling me about some wines that they had purchased in Europe, had shipped back to the States, and they were going to store these wines for some anniversary. It was a 1971 Pouilly-Fuissé. Okay, so this is a wine from Southern Burgundy made from Chardonnay, a wine that has a life of maybe 4 or 5 years with a few exceptions out there. This person had taken the effort to meticulously store these wines for 25 years. Didn't have the heart to tell them that there was going to be a colossal disappointment coming. So let's turn this question upside down a bit. When the term improves is used, what are we really talking about? It's something that's very subjective, and it depends on what that individual wine drinker is looking for. I may taste an older wine and I may find it really appealing. You may, and you may find it very off-putting. So to say it improves, that again is really in the eye of the beholder. I would also contend that there's a good amount of wines out there that can actually maintain themselves for something beyond 3 or 4 years, but they really don't develop into anything more than what they were in its earlier age. This is one that I often hear, and in my point of view, this is a half-truth at best. There certainly are a good number of wines that do benefit from chilling. And I'm not saying getting the wines very, very cold. What I'm saying is bringing the wines down a bit below room temperature, maybe 30 minutes in the fridge, especially those wines that show a lot of primary fruit and are low in tannin. These can generally be things like Pinot Noir, Gamay, some Grenache. These are all great candidates to be chilled down a bit. Conversely, if you have wines with a lot of extract, and especially those with a lot of tannin, if you were to chill those down too much, what you'll end up doing is highlighting the tannin level in the wines, and it'll actually detract from the overall quality. I would contend that serving temperature is actually one of the most critical pieces in getting the most out of your wines. That said, this is not an exact science, and certainly there's a heavy dose of personal preference that comes into play. Lastly, this myth came into being many decades ago when generally homes were not as warm as they are today. So take that into consideration as well. Now, this myth is really taking the previous one and just turning it on its head. To say that all white wines should be chilled, again, half truth at best. And what are we talking about when we say chilled? Many wines, white wines, are served much too cold. I think in part it's a function of geography. Certainly if you're in the US, everything that is cold is served really cold. So that's part of the equation. But if you have wines that are based on primary fruit, those that are fresh, bright, clean, think of things like Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio, they're going to benefit from being chilled, but we're not talking 32 to 40 degrees, which is what a typical refrigerator would be. Ideally, more in that 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 Celsius range. What that's going to do is it's going to allow the fresh fruit character to show through, but it's not going to be so cold that you're going to deaden all of the aromatics and the flavors. Conversely, there are some whites that actually benefit from being at a serving temp that is almost the same as what you'll find with reds. Think of wines that have a lot of complexity, a lot of depth, a lot of richness. It may be some top-notch white Burgundy, maybe a very good Margaret River Chardonnay from Western Australia, maybe something like Condrieu. These are things that actually benefit from having a slightly warmer temp. So since I can't make it through a video without tasting at least one wine, I do have one here that's going to help to prove the point that we just discussed. Here I have a bottle of Puy Fumé from a producer called Masson Blondelet, one of my favorite producers from the Loire. Small producer, one of these family-run outfits. Really tough to find. But if you ever do see this, you're going to really enjoy it. But this wine came out of the fridge. Again, very, very cold. It's been sitting out for about 15 minutes. The temp has come up. And the end result with this is just a huge lift in aromatics. It has a lot more of that perfumed citrusy fruit. I mean, just a lot of purity to it, but it's intensified because the temp has actually come up. Same on the palate. It's got a lot more flavor than when it first came out of the fridge and was stone cold. So absolutely, when you've got your white wines, bring that temp up a little bit. You're going to get much more aromatics and a whole lot more flavor. Hey, and to me, those two things combined means you're going to get more enjoyment. Well, there still may be a good number of people who hold this one as being true. I think this one is really starting to wane, and that is screw caps being tied to inferior quality wine. Look, the fact is, screw caps are one of the greatest things to come into the wine business in a long, long time. It has saved and preserved countless bottles of wine, and it's delivered them to customers in a condition that you just are not going to get always when you're working with cork. Now, screw caps came into being decades ago. The driver behind it was, for the most part, Australia and New Zealand. When I lived in Australia a few years ago, I was very surprised when I went into a Dan Murphy's, one of the nicer wine shops. This was in Melbourne. And virtually everything from Australia was under screw cap, and a lot of the imports were as well. So I think the statement of screw caps being tied to inferior wine really begs a broader question. Why is it that screw caps have come to be such a presence in today's market? A lot of this has been driven by the inconsistency with cork, the ability that cork has to sometimes taint a wine and to actually ruin a wine. In some cases, there's problems with bottles leaking. In other cases, corks are just not available. They're pricey. It's a piece of tree bark, and it's not the most consistent seal that there is. With the screw cap, you've got something that's very consistent, it's inexpensive, and it's readily available. The science behind the screw caps now are fantastic, and especially for wines that are very bright, fresh, clean, those wines that have a short life to them, screw caps are an absolute godsend. There is one market in the world that has not embraced screw caps, and that is the Asian market. To a large extent, cork is still king there, to the extent that even Australian and New Zealand producers that ship into Asian countries will oftentimes ship in cork because that's exactly what that market wants. Also, younger wine consumers have very much embraced the screw cap. They look at it as simple, convenient, you don't need a special tool to open the bottle. So they've been a big driver in the acceptance of screw caps. Thank you so much for staying to the end of the video. If you have any comments about myths that you've come across, please post it down below. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, cheers.